Hey, what's going on? Christopher Fraser here, back with another Blender tutorial. So about a month or two ago, I released my free planet shader for Blender that you can go and download from my Gumroad. There's a link in the description to that. In fact, I just uploaded it as of recording this today to fix a couple of issues with the clouds and make them look a little bit nicer and cleaner when you're using cycles and actually Eevee. So with that, I just wanted to let you know so you can re-download it and check that out. I recently got a comment, in fact a week ago, that says, "You are absolutely fantastic." Oh, thank you, you are too. Just one thing, what about other alien planets? Because there are no textures available on the internet. How can we make those? Because in your intro video you showed some of those planets. Can you make tutorials on those too? Thanks a lot, bro. You are welcome a lot, bro. So, if you haven't seen the tutorial or the trailer for the planet shader, basically there are some shots in both trailers that use some alien looking planets, so like some gas giants and some other interesting looking things, and I thought I would cover this because this is an interesting topic that will allow you to make some really cool looking planets with honestly a relatively small amount of work. So here are just some examples. I'm not going to look into how to make these specifically, but here are a couple of examples of ones that I've made. So I've made this cool lava planet, and all of these are inspired by Star Wars planets because I'm a huge Star Wars fan. So this one kind of inspired by Mustafar. You can see we've got some really cool lava texture. And again, it's all very, very cool and real looking. We've got some nice clouds here. And the surface is a little hard to see, but there is kind of a cratery, stony surface. And you can see with Node Wrangler enabled, which comes with Blender, you should make sure that that is enabled. Just pop under Edit Preferences, Add-ons, Node Wrangler. If I Control-Shift left click on this, then we can see the surface here. And you can see that we've got some cool surface detail here and such. So we've got this cool lava planet that we'll be checking out how to do some fun stuff with the emission. Then we've got this planet, which is made to look a little bit like Felucia from Star Wars, which is an alien planet. You don't really see it a lot in the movies. It only comes up for a brief moment. But it's kind of this yellowish, greenish looking planet. And we're going to be looking at some techniques for integrating like oceans and things, and doing some recoloring of the terrain and making roughness maps and such. And then we've got this last one, which is kind of interesting. And this is a gas giant, which ended up kind of being fashioned after Bespin just a little bit. And we're going to be looking at some interesting ways to use the clouds to make some things like gas giants and make them look a little bit more interesting. So with that, I guess we can just go ahead and open up a new scene in Blender. Now I'm just going to hit Shift A and add in, actually the first thing I'm going to do, because I have Octane installed, and I have in my startup file is set to that by default. I want to bring this into Octane because, I want to bring this into Cycles because that's just going to allow the planets to update a bit faster while we're working with our nodes. So I will set the device to GPU compute, and I'm going to come in and import the actual shader. So I've got Planet Shader 1.0.1 node tree, and just double click on that planet shader. Now, I'm going to add in a sphere. Now, what's important about the sphere is that it's pretty high resolution. Now, we could use a subdivision surface modifier to bring up the resolution, but we get some weird UV issues when it comes to the top. So what we're going to do instead is, without doing anything, we've just added this in, we're going to open up this little panel here and set the segments to something much higher, like 128, and the rings to just whatever half of the segments is. So in this case, 64. By setting the rings to half of the segments amounts, we ensure that we get these square faces. It's kind of difficult to see, but we just make sure that all of the faces are squares. Now that we've done that, we can right click and select Shade Smooth. And then I'll click and drag from this corner up here, to open a second window. And I'm going to set this to the shader editor so that we can actually use it. So I'll hit N to collapse this panel, or you can always just drag it in. And then we'll hit New, and I'll call this Planets. Now from here, well, I guess we can delete the principal BSDF, and then we'll hit Shift A, and under Group, find the Planet shader, and then again with Node Wrangler enabled, Control Shift left click so that we can enable the shader. I will just click the Rendered View button up here, and then I can add in with Shift A a new sunlight, and then I'll move it over here, rotate it around so that it's a bit interesting. RZ to rotate it along the Z axis, or Z axis if you say it weird. And then we can come under the light properties and set the strength to something like 3. And then maybe we come down and under color management, we use very high, okay, as our contrast value. And then we can set the background to black. Whew, that was a lot of steps, but we're not quite done yet, because here's the thing that we've run into just now, is we still don't have any actual textures to use. So with the Planet Shader, I gave you a free download to some 6K Earth textures that you can use, and one of those will be very helpful as we move forward, but most of those are just Earth textures. So what you're going to want to do is open up your favorite browser, and you can search NASA Planet Textures. We'll hit enter, and you're going to want to find this Solar System Scope website. There's also a link to that in the description, and right here, the first result should be solarsystemscope.com/textures, and this will give you access to a whole bunch of really high quality textures taken from NASA that you can download and use for whatever purposes you would like. Thank you for your cookies. I like to use cookies too, to satisfy my horribly unhealthy desires. Anyways, so you're going to want to pick out a couple of these interesting textures. I recommend Mercury is generally pretty interesting. Mars is pretty cool. I mean, all of them really. Uranus and Neptune are a little bit on the, kind of useful-ish side. And then you may also want to come down and check out things like the sun texture, this moon texture, and these fictional textures. They're not quite as high resolution, but they're very, very helpful, because while they all are in some ways a little similar when it comes to the textures and patterns of them, they're all a little bit different, and that can help you to create some variety. So I've already got them downloaded, but download them, put them someplace you'll remember, and we'll hop back over into Blender here. And I'm actually going to hit N real quickly to open up this side panel. And under View, I want to set the focal length to something a little higher, like 150, just so we get a bit of a nicer, longer look. And I'll hit N to close that. I can actually hit T to collapse that panel as well. And then maybe we'll turn off overlays here. We'll click this to toggle overlays. And then let's select our sphere. Now what we're going to want to do is maybe we want to get a bit of an idea for what exactly we're going to do. So I find it helpful to pull up some kind of a reference. So like over on the side here, I can pull up and I can search for something. So I have got a reference image pulled up here that I'm going to use for Felucia, which is again a cool planet from Star Wars. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off just by picking one of these image textures here and throwing it on top. Now we could use really any one of these. I think I'll grab maybe this fictional series, and we'll Control-Shift left click and check it out. This is quite low resolution actually. I'm going to come in, I'm going to make sure that I have the proper textures downloaded. So here you can see we've got, yes, this nice high resolution texture. So once you open it up, you can hit Control-S or right click on it, hit Save Image As. So now I've got that saved somewhere on my computer, and I can take it, I can find it. Where did it go? It's right here. So now I can drag this in. We can preview that. Much higher resolution, much more fidelity. Maybe we'll come in and download a couple more of these. I like this. Look at Make as well. Cool. And now with all these new textures, maybe we'll try out this Make. Actually, Haumea, I really like this. Let's try playing around with this. So what we can do here is the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to define where some of our continents are, our land is. Now what we could actually do, in fact, is we could combine some textures. Maybe we try using Eris here, and I'll hit Shift A, or yeah, I'll hit Shift A, and we'll just search here. I know I want a color ramp, so I'll just grab that. That is not the right node. Color ramp. And then we can play around with this a little bit and just sort of crush that like so. And that may be an okay place to start. It's just about getting some interesting detail in here that we can work with. It may not be perfect, but I mean, it's something at least. You can play around with whatever else you want to do. Maybe you'd like to try using Mars. Okay, so we'll come in here, color ramp, sort of crush this here. We've got some really interesting stuff going on. This is kind of cool actually. We might just go with this. We've got Mars, and this is going to be sort of our continent map. And then maybe we could mix some things together here, like we could use that, and then I will add in a color mix RGB node, and maybe I will multiply this on top like so, or maybe I'll do it the other way around. So we get something like that. Maybe I'll set this to 0.9, something like that. So we're getting sort of a combination of the two textures. Then we could even come in here and maybe we hit Control-Shift-D on this, and then we could take this and pull that in just a little bit. Maybe, no, let's take that. Let's just bring the brightness of that down just a touch and add in a new thing here that's going to be white. Yeah, so we can just maybe bring that down just a little bit. So we're just creating right now sort of a height map for the whole planet. We've got our continent map, and now we've got our height map. Sorry, this is our height map. So you see how that works? So we've got a couple different color ramps here. So they're both right here. They both have the black point at the same point, which is sort of where the oceans are going to be. This right here is actually going to determine where we're going to have our oceans mixed in. And this just helps to determine a little bit of the height. And we just multiply this on top, this other texture on top, and we get some more interest within the height area. And now we could hit Shift-A, we could go Vector and Bump, and now we just have a finished normal map here. Now this is a little bit crazy looking. So what I actually like to do, you could bring down the strength, but I like to start by bringing down the distance, because it changes how the program actually reads, how Blender actually reads the height information. So I like to bring down the distance by a good bit first. And then that might actually do it. We could maybe bring down the strength just a little bit to like 0.5 or something. But now we've got this nice looking normal thing going on here. Now if we plug this into the output there, so you need to close something that's giving me notifications. We can plug this into the normal for our content. Now this is just sort of a starting point, and I'll delete this texture. I'll grab all of these, hit G so that we can move them. This is a good starting point. But now I want to take this and I want to make a color map for the planet. So I'll hit Shift-A, and then we'll use a converter color ramp again. Now here, actually, I think I'll bring back this texture here, this Maki. Yeah, I think we might try to use this, and we could use this actually more so as our color map. I'll plug that in there. Control-Shift, left-click on the color ramp. Now maybe we use B-spline so that we can bring these together, so we can kind of get these harder lines, but we have some nice fall off. And then what we could do is we could make some parts of the ground, we could make it kind of a brown soil, and then other parts that are maybe sort of a green, yellow grass type deal. And we don't want any of this to be particularly bright or anything. Then we can come in, bring in some more points here. Get a little bit more detail. Just mess around with it. Get something that's kind of cool looking. And check that out. We've got some cool color here. But we don't want to plug this straight in because, remember, we've got these oceans to worry about. So what we can do, so I'll hit Q. I explained this in the last thing. You can right-click on things and assign them to your quick favorites. So I have, if you hit Shift-A and bring up this add menu, I have the search bar as a quick favorite. So let me just show you. You can hit Shift-A or go to this add menu down here. Right-click on the search and hit add to quick favorites. And then when you hit Q, which is the quick favorite shortcut, or at least it is for me, it'll bring that up. So I can just hit Q and then hit enter and then start typing. So that's what I like to do, because I can just say, all right, I need a mix RGB node, and then I need like a color ramp, and then you get the idea. But you can just come down here to add, and under converter, under color, find mix RGB. And then we want to plug this into the bottom input here. And the reason why is because whatever we plug into the factor, remember, this is our continent map, okay? Whatever we plug into the factor, when we do that, the white is going to mean this input, and the black is going to mean this input. So, because the white here is where I intend for all of the lands to be, I want this to be where the white is going to mix. So, just to show you, you can see this whole area here in the middle, right in the middle here, is currently white. If I plug this into the mix RGB in the factor, and Control-Shift left-click on that, you can see that that is now where all of our land is. But all of this now is just this gray. It's whatever this color is. Now, what we can do is we can take this, and we're going to make this into our ocean's color. So we want this to be pretty dark. And then I'm going to make this sort of a teal, maybe a teal greenish type color. And then you can even make it a little darker if you wanted to. And that's that. We've actually got our color map all sorted out here. So just to sort of recap what exactly we did, we basically just went ahead and took some different textures and put them together, right? It doesn't really matter how you do it. In this case, we started off with Mars, used this as our continent land map, used a color amp to play around with that. We used another sort of copy of that that's a little bit softer to get some of this height information, and the same thing with this right here, Haumea. We used some of the height information from this, and then we got a cool bump map that we could use with the bump node. And remember, we want to use the distance first, and then check out the strength, because the distance, you can see if we hit 1 here, it makes this all noisy again. But if we set this down, it actually changes the way that it looks for this height information. And it makes it just look a little bit better, in my opinion. And then we got this color here by using another texture and just plugging it through a color ramp and using that in a mix RGB node with the continent map and just getting in an ocean color. Now I might come in here because this looks a little dark. I'll click, hit the planet and hit the number pad period key. This looks a little dark, so I want to come in here and I'll select RGB here just because this gives a more accurate representation of how bright things are. And I just want to bring up the intensity of these by a bit so that relative to each other, it's still pretty bright, or it's still there's still the same difference in luminance, but just to make it a bit brighter. And then this will also allow us, if we want to make the oceans just a little brighter, so that'll appear a little better in our final product. Now, if you wanted to, you could even take this a step further and do something like adding some of those blue spots that are sometimes around, you know, shores and things. So we could take this color ramp, duplicate it again. So before we did this and we brought the white point in so that we could essentially make it softer inside, but in this case we want to make it softer outside. And I'll show you a bit of what I'm creating here in just a second. So I'm just going to bring this out a bit, not too much, and then we'll bring in another texture, maybe one that we haven't used yet, maybe something like the Venus surface texture. Okay, check that out. I'm going to bring in another color ramp, and I'm just going to sort of clamp it like that. And then we'll do a color mix RGB node and combine these by using the multiply function. So we have this, so we have here, it's only white where this right here and this sort of intersect. So it brings those parts in. Now, what I'm going to do here, we're going to actually, let's duplicate this mix RGB, okay? We want to actually keep this as well, this ocean's color. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this now, remember this is what we just created, and we'll plug that into the bottom. So we can check that out and see what that's doing. And we'll plug this in as our ocean texture, right? So then the land is on top of that. So you can kind of see what we're doing here. And if you want to make it kind of like what it's like on Earth, sorry, we want this to be in the mix factor. If you want this to be kind of like what it looks like on Earth, you can make this a bit teal and bring up the luminance. But you can kind of see the thing that I'm going for here. I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure entirely what it is in the actual Earth, but you know, we're going ahead and making it. So maybe we'll make it a bit more green. And then we could come into here, into our color ramp. Yeah, this one, and mess around with it a little bit. So we could even, yeah, we could bring the black point all the way out, or we could use a B-spline. So if we do this, then we get some nicer, smoother fall off. We could also do the same here if we wanted to. Let's see, maybe do something like that. And that will just give us a bit more control. Now there's a little bit of variation all throughout the oceans, which is a little nicer. So you can see it's almost like black magic that we've just done here, where we've just created a texture for a planet that doesn't actually exist just by combining textures of planets that do exist and even other textures of planets that don't exist. So now all we have to do is we can take this and plug this into our base color, and then we'll see what that looks like at the moment. So we can see we've got a planet here that should have some height information here, and it's also got our color information. Now what we might do here actually is, because this is what's driving the color, is we can maybe use this instead of, where do we use it? Instead of this Haumea texture. So if we plug this in instead, then we could get something that is perhaps a little more consistent with our color map and is maybe a little easier to see. Now we could actually bring this strength, remember, up above 1 if you want to. Okay, and some of this will become a bit more apparent in a moment or two. So we'll set the strength to maybe 1 for now. The next thing that we need to do, of course, is that we need a roughness map. So what we're going to do for that is we're just going to take really any one of these textures we could. But most importantly is probably the continent texture right here. Right, we could pretty much use this and modify it a bit for our final roughness texture. So here's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to do something a little bit interesting. And this is something that I actually did when I created the Earth textures that you get with the planet shader. Is I'm going to take my clouds map. So if you go download the Earth textures, I'm going to go ahead and use the clouds map. We can preview that. See how that looks. And I'm going to combine it with this. So we're getting a little bit messy here. So maybe we can separate some of these things just so we can see. Maybe we join some things. Cool. Just to help to separate things a little bit better. Now, whoops. So we've got this this texture here. Maybe we take something like the height, or sorry, we're going to take the continents. That's right. And we're going to add in another mix RGB node here. Bring that all the way up. And I'm going to plug in the clouds. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this to something like screen. Okay, so it's actually just going to add the clouds to this. So I might bring the factor down to like 0.5 or something, maybe 0.2. Right, now this is actually going to be way too glossy. This part is going to be way too glossy. So we're going to go ahead and add a converter color ramp, and then set this black point way up, something like this. So this black point right here, if we look at this, this is essentially what the roughness value is. So this is equivalent to the roughness being, well, in this case, we set this to 0.3. This is the same as setting the roughness to 0.3. Okay, so if we plug this in there, you can see it makes it a bit glossier, but not too much. And here, of course, we've got the land, which is super rough. And that pretty much passes for a glossy map. Although we could come in here, we could say B-spline, maybe. We could get something a little bit more interesting. Maybe we bring up the factor for that a little bit more. We could get something that creates a lot of visual interest. I think just setting this, just using linear and adjusting this works just fine. So maybe we'll go with something a little bit shinier, like that. And so we've got our roughness map. Okay, now the point of adding in the clouds is that it creates a little bit of interesting variation that isn't, I don't know, that's not super strange, I guess that's what it is. So we'll maybe make that actually a bit rougher. So it just adds in a little bit of nice, natural looking variation. But the other thing that we still haven't done, and you'll notice, is that the sky is gray. And that's a little weird. So following along actually with my reference in this case, I'm going to take the sky color, which, if you remember from the planet shader tutorial, will mess around with the color of the atmosphere. We're going to take this and we're going to push this maybe a bit towards like a yellowish green. We're not going to push it too far, just a little bit so that it looks natural. And that looks pretty good. But there's still something missing, still something that we haven't thrown in yet, and that is clouds. Now with clouds, you can be a little bit liberal because they're clouds. what I actually did for the original here, and what I think I'll replicate, is I used the Venus clouds. Now I'll hit N to collapse this again. I used the Venus clouds texture. We can check that out. I didn't use it directly. I think what I did is I plugged in a color ramp, and I maybe flipped it. Now I like to use B-spline for this to keep it nice and soft. And then I think my cloud map was something like, it was like this. And then I'll add in another point so we can crush that, make it a little bit snappier. But it looks something like this. Then we can take that and plug that into the clouds map. When we look at it, we can see we got clouds. Yay. Now here's something that we did not explore in the Planet Shader tutorial, which is the clouds color. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I fixed up some things with the clouds that caused them to look a little strange. So here in this case, I'm going to make the clouds a little bit of like a yellowish, greenish color, kind of like the atmosphere. Something a little bit like that. And then we've just got an interesting looking planet. We've got something that's brand new and original. And you can see we've got some of this cool height information coming through. We've got our color, we've got our roughness, we've got our clouds. We've got everything in order. We've got a completely original alien looking planet, and it looks sweet. But this isn't everything that we can do. So I'm going to select everything here, and I'll hit Control J, and I'll just call this Flucia, and bring up the label size so that I can reference it. And then we'll move this up. I'll hit N again to collapse that. Now, whoops. Now, I'm going to hit Shift A and add in another planet shader, because there's another thing that I want to explore a little bit more deeply. This one is going to be more of a lava planet. So for this, we want to choose something that already looks a little bit maybe rocky-ish. Something that might actually be a good thing to try out is the Venus surface texture, because, of course, Venus, I almost said Zenus, Venus is a very molten planet. But I have other plans for the Venus texture. Although maybe, if you look around, there's some other things that might be pretty cool for this. Let's see here. You know what, let's try this. We're going to do something a little bit different. We are going to use the Venus texture for this. So, I'm going to add in a converter color ramp, okay? Because this, the Venus texture, this is an actual volcanic planet anyway, so, maybe it's more realistic or whatever. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring down the brightness of the whites by a lot. And then maybe, you could bring up the blacks. Maybe you want to make them a color, like make it kind of a reddish color. And that's pretty much going to do it for our color information, honestly. We can just plug that right into the base color and give our planet a look, and this just looks extremely dead and sad. So this could be like the planet of death or something. I don't know. The next thing that we want to do, though, that I'm going to do, is use this Venus texture to start our bump map. So we'll create another bump node and plug this into the height, and set the distance to something like 0.005, just like before. And that works out pretty nicely. That looks pretty good. And then we'll plug this into the normal, and we'll give this, a quick look. You can see kind of how that's going. Honestly, the bump map isn't going to matter too much in the end. And you'll see why. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to handle the roughness, okay? Now the roughness we could pretty much just bring up by hand, but we might go ahead and we could just duplicate this color ramp, and maybe this will be our roughness map. So I can bring down the saturation here. Then we'll set the whites all the way back up. And I like to adjust the roughness with it live so that I can see what it actually looks like. So maybe we come down to the blacks, or what's now these grays. And we're going to bring this up a lot so that it's very rough, but maybe it's not like completely white. So there is technically a little bit of variation. It's just basically unnoticeable. You can do what you want. Maybe there's some parts that are almost more like clay, or that are always molten or something. Who knows? It's your planet to do whatever you want to do with. So we've got our color and our roughness and our normal sorted out. But what we're going to be playing with more here is actually the illumination, or the emission here. Because this is a molten planet. We want there to be a lot of lava. So this is another thing that you can play around with and have fun with. So we're going to Control Shift left click on this planet again. And I'm going to add in a color ramp. converter, color ramp. Now for this, we'll set this to B-spline, and I'll bring in the whites just a little, but I really want to bring in the blacks because I don't want the lava to cover the whole planet. So maybe we'll bring this up a little more. Mess around with this. We could even bring in a second, or I guess a third point in here. Something that looks kind of like that. This is kind of cool. But obviously it doesn't have the colors. So we're going to do something where what we'll do is we'll start off with the mix RGB node. Okay, and we'll start maybe with this set to overlay, perhaps. So the factor to 1. And bring this up. We're going to set this to sort of a cool lava orange. And you can see what this is doing is it's creating a nice ramping effect. If we just set it to multiply, it would just make it orange all over. But by doing this and setting it to overlay, we're getting a bit of this nicer color, I guess, ramping, whatever you want to call it. And we could set this to be a bit of a warmer color because this is affecting these darker points more than the brighter points. Now we'll duplicate it, and we will set this one to multiply. I think we can bring down the saturation a bit. We can play around with it here and make it a bit more yellow. You see, so by doing that in that order, we handled first the darker parts, and then the multiply. It did kind of the whole image, but it also specifically brought down the white point. So whatever this is set to is what the white point now is. So this is going to be our lava map. And again, you can come back in here and you can mess around with this color ramp to get a different look. Or perhaps you could bring in a different map altogether. Maybe you want to try this Haumea texture and use that. We can add in another color ramp. And then maybe try using this and look at that, and you see it makes the color look all nice. But I think we're going to stick with using this texture here. Now, really all we have to do, and I'm just going to select this real quickly, hit number pad 0 and number pad 1 to reorient myself. Then we can orbit around. And I'm using middle clicking and dragging, by the way, to orbit. So select all this, hit G to move it down just a little. And now we can move this into the emission. So if we just take a look at the whole shader, then man, we have got a bright looking lava on fire planet. So we might come down here and, try to tame this just a bit. This could be maybe a little bit extreme. But look at that. This is really cool looking. But we're not quite done yet, because what happens when you have a super molten planet that's constantly erupting with fire everywhere? I can tell you that when there are a lot of fires near you, there's a lot of smoke. So what we're going to need to do is have clouds, essentially, but it's actually smoke. You see, with a planet like this, or like Earth, you might have clouds because it's evaporated water, or whatever the weird green liquid is here. But here you have clouds because, well, it's actually smoke. It's not clouds. But we can still use the same technique. What we're going to do is we're going to take the Earth clouds texture again. And we can get a preview of that. But this is looking a little light to me. This is looking a little thin. There are a lot of black areas. So what we can do is we can duplicate this by hitting Shift D. And I'll just preview this. And if we hit Control T, again with Node Wrangler enabled, it'll bring up this mapping node. So what we can do is we can use this X value here to move the texture along our planet. So I'll set this to maybe 0.3 or something, just so that it's rotated a bit differently. And then I'll add a mix RGB node, plug that in there, and set this to lighten, and then turn that all the way up. So you can see the way that it takes these two textures and it mixes them together. But we could even go a little bit denser if we wanted to. So if we select all of these now and hit Shift D, we can duplicate this as well and plug this into there. We can take this and move it a bit differently. Here's another thing that you can do that nobody's stopping you from doing. So you can take the rotation of the Z rotation and set it to 180. Now it's upside down as well. So you can see we've got a lot of these clouds everywhere. And we're going to take this and start off by just plugging this into the clouds map and seeing how it looks. Now this is definitely some dense cloud coverage, and I think it looks pretty good. So the next step that we could do is we actually want to change the color of the clouds, because smoke isn't white. So smoke, we might want to bring down the brightness a little bit. It's got a little bit of an orangish tinge to it. And if you actually look at satellite imagery, if you search something like smoke space, I guess, or smoke satellite imagery. If we take a look at it here, we can see that it's got this like orangish and then greenish tint. And we can use this as direct inspiration here. This is, you know, one of the good things that comes from really bad things is VFX artists can use it as reference, I guess. So I'm going to use this because you can see there's some nice difference here between the clouds. So this is something that we can use as reference. So we've got this orangish tint on the highlights, and then when it gets darker, it's actually a little bit greenish or bluish, you know, whatever. So what we can do to achieve that is by, instead of just changing the cloud's color, we can use, and I'm not going to use a color ramp here. I'm going to use an interesting trick here. You can take a mix RGB node, and if we take this and plug it into the factor, whoops, we've almost got like a tint going on here. So this becomes the blacks, and this becomes the whites. So we can take this and make it a little bit beige, like we were talking about. We can bring this up and make it a little bit green-blue. Now when we plug this into the clouds color, take a look at the shader, it looks a little bit more like that reference image that we were just looking at. I still don't love this though. So the other thing that we might do here, I'm just going to hold down Shift and then right click and drag across here to create this reroute node right in the middle. I'm going to hit Shift A and add in a converter color ramp after this, because what I want to do is I sort of want to fatten up these clouds a little bit. But first, it is important to save your projects. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to set this, I'm actually going to Control Shift left click to preview it. I'm going to hit B spline. You can bring the black in a little bit. Maybe we'll actually do something like that. And I'm just going to take this middle point here and bring that down a little bit. We can drag that over that way. What we can do is we can already see the before and after, kind of how that's changing things. We might want to change it like this though. So it overall becomes a little bit brighter, right? But the other important thing is we're using a color ramp and we're using B-spline so that we don't completely clip things. Like technically, it's kind of difficult to see, but if we come under color management, we can change the gamma. You can see that there's still a difference there, right? We haven't lost that detail. So that's why I like to use this. And it may not matter too much to your eye. Like it looks like in here, we've pretty much lost detail. But to things like the bump map as well, that's also going to make a difference. Because you can see that the bump is still finding detail in there. So we'll just do something like that to fatten up the clouds. Or the smoke, sorry. And maybe we'll come in here. Maybe the saturation can be brought down a little bit on the whites. Maybe we could actually bring the white part back and just bring in this part a bit closer. Maybe that would be a little bit better. I mean, it's all of this is a balancing act when you're playing with things like color ramps and whatnot. So I'll just try to figure out what is the best balance between things. So we get that. And now we can come in here actually. And speaking of bump, we can again come to the bump distance and maybe 0.01 looks a little bit better. In this case, I think it definitely does. So now we've got a lot of smoke covering the planet, which helps to add a lot to it. I'll hit the numpad 0 again. So this is almost there. Once again, the last thing we need to do, save, and then change the sky color to something a bit reddish, yellowish, perhaps. Something like that to reflect the fact that there's always smoke in the air. You could even, if you wanted to, bring down the brightness. Do whatever you see fit, but it should be kind of it should have kind of a yellowish tinge for the most part. You can mess around with this. With these kinds of things, like lava planets, it tends to look better if you have sort of a reddish looking atmosphere. It tends to reinforce that look, and who knows what else would be in the air and how else that would change. In fact, what we can actually do, since we can look at reference of horrible things. Let's see, what does it look like when the sky is full of ash and smoke? What is it? Okay, it does create a very red looking sky. Now that's something that, again, is good to look at, right? Even here, we've got it's a lot of orange. It is yellowish, but it's also very orange. Man, this is horrible stuff we're using for our advantage here. But, at the end of the day, we're getting some cool looking planets out of it. So we can do that. And we've created a really cool looking lava planet here. So again, just to kind of go over what we did, we started off with our texture here. This was pretty generic, we just used a Venus surface, and we could use whatever else too. We could use something like Mercury. Mercury might look really good because with this image here, I'm not sure if it's an issue with an image or if this is actually how it looks. We've got some weird things where it looks like stuff is doubling up. So maybe we take this and do that again, and we could replace this with this Mercury texture. Right? I mean, it doesn't have to be Mercury. It could be whatever else you want it to be. And maybe that helps with some of those weird little issues. I don't know how noticeable it will be here because we've got so much other stuff covering it. But I'd like to believe in my heart that it is making some sort of a difference. But we started off with a planet texture. We just played around with the colors a little bit. Got a roughness map by using a color ramp, bump node, pretty normal stuff. And then we took another texture, we crunched it a lot, and we used overlay and multiply to make it look all cool and molten and fiery. And then we just used some clouds textures, put them together, put them through a color ramp, and then plug them into the clouds map, and use a mix RGB node to make it look like smoke in this case, which just helps to sell the look of fire. We might even make this a little bit more smoky. So remember, this clouds map here, the whole clouds feature, doesn't need to be used exclusively for real clouds. It can be used for things like this when you're doing something like smoke. But is this it for what we can do with this planet shader and these textures? No, it is not. And there's one last thing that I'd like to talk about, and that is gas giants. And we'll just plug in a brand new planet shader. Okay, so we're going to use this now and start off with something a little bit more familiar, which is Jupiter, because Jupiter is an actual gas giant and it looks pretty cool. So, and because we're making a gas giant, so we're going to start off with Jupiter here, and maybe we actually bring in something else interesting, like this Venus atmosphere, and we can come in here and let's play around maybe, right? We do mix RGB, okay, and yeah, we get something like that, and then we can use a color ramp, set it to B-spline maybe, to sort of solidify that shape a little bit more, I mean, it's all about the combination of different interesting looking things. Maybe we try setting it to something like overlay to get a different look, or it could be multiply. And just play around with color, with blending modes is a good way to go. Setting it to something like lighten or darken is also an interesting way to go. So you started off with this interesting base map here, and we'll come in here and we'll maybe add in a little bit more color, and we'll go with something a little bit classic, sort of an orange look. We'll go with something, red and orange, and this is a really good start for a gas giant. Now, we don't actually need to make a roughness map here, because with gas giants, I can tell you, because they are gas, the roughness should be 100%. There should be no glossiness, because gas isn't shiny. So the roughness should be 100%, and that will take away all of those specular highlights. So we've got an interesting start here, and it's already not quite recognizable as Jupiter anymore, which is good. But I think we could take it a step further if we wanted to. And that's where we're going to harness sort of the full capability of the clouds, right? Because we can use it to add layers to something, like to add a clouds layer or a smoke layer like we've seen, but we can also use it as straight up a part of the planet. So maybe we take this 8K Saturn texture. We can take a look at that. And this is something that I used for one of the planets in the trailer. So we'll use another color ramp because they're amazing. and we'll use B-spline to sort of pull this back. Now we could actually make this different from what I've done in the past. We'll just invert this, do something like that. So you can see we've got these interesting lines going all across it. And now we're going to use this as a clouds map. So you can see it creates some more layers on top of it. And because of the way that it works, first of all, we've got some like shadow under it, so maybe it creates a little extra depth. But it's also, it responds, you know, the way that a gas essentially should respond, because it's made for clouds. So it's also not specular or shiny or anything. So it's a nice way to add, again, another layer on top of this. And we can mess around with the clouds color maybe. We could do whatever we wanted to with that. Make it sort of an orange to match the rest of the planet. And this just makes it more of its own thing, really. In fact, we can come in here, we can use this layering to our advantage by maybe, yeah, we make the center there, we can make it a bit more, that maybe we push the color a little bit in a different direction for the center. Right, and again, that's for this whole lower layer. But we're just adding in this extra thing on top. We can even mess around with this more. If we add in, we'll add another white one here. And then some more black on this side. See again some of that fun layering at work there. And take a look at the result. Maybe we come in here and bring this down a little bit. Maybe we swap sides. You know, it's all about playing with it and getting something that you think looks pretty cool. So there really is no wrong way to do this. It's kind of like Bob Ross. You know, you just add in some happy clouds, some happy layers here and there. Maybe we mess around with the saturation here. Do a different color. You know, just kind of take it wherever you want it to go. In this case, we're just messing around here. So again, that allows us to create some more interesting layers that go on top of it. And it kind of changes the way that the actual planet is shaded as well, because there's this feature that creates almost like a sort of fake shading. So it helps again to add some more depth to your planet. Maybe in this case, maybe we bring down some of this. We try to blend it in a little bit better with the rest of the planet. Yeah, so we got something pretty cool looking here. And now we want to change, of course, the sky color. So we could come in here and we'll make this maybe a blue. Now I want to actually go back to that idea of using emission, because what we can do is we can create sort of the appearance of storms, like maybe there are lightning storms that happen here. So if we take something like what's a good way to go? We could take something like this Eris texture. I don't know if we actually ended up using this for anything. And maybe we take a color ramp and we could actually invert it. So we're just using some of these very darkest parts of it. Right, so areas like here. And we could take this and plug this into the emission. Okay, but we want to take this a bit of a step further. I think we'll go ahead and use a similar technique to what we used before, where what we're going to do, we're going to go overlay and then multiply. Starting off with kind of a dark blue, and then here moving to a bit more of a teal. So we've got like these awesome storms going on. We don't have to use that. We could use something different. Maybe you want to check out using this Venus atmosphere another time for some fun shenanigans here. Yeah, we can make it whatever color you wish it to be. Maybe there's some cool chemical reactions. And maybe we just don't go with the emission at all. Now, something else is that when you typically look at planets like gas giants like this, you don't see a really intense atmosphere haze. So I wanted to show you a cool trick for sort of taking that out. So what we can do is go back to the mix RGB and set this to multiply. And remember, we're plugging this into the color here. Actually, the first thing we want to do is, I'll mute that. The first thing we want to do, okay, that we're going to do to actually make it less visible is we're going to bring down the brightness, right? If we set this to black, it's not quite so visible. So we can bring down the brightness of that, and that will make it much less visible, okay? Because what you could do is you could bring down like the haze factor, for example. But when you do that, it just becomes tighter around the edges. Like if we set the glow to 0, and just bring down the haze factor, you see that just makes it tighter, but it doesn't make it less intense. But if we bring down the sky color here, it makes it uniformly darker. Or maybe set the glow factor to 0.45 instead of 0.5. So that helps with that a little bit, but this has the potential to darken your planet a little bit. So what we can do is bring a mix RGB set to multiply. I'm actually going to add in an input value node and plug this in here. And what we can do is we can set this to something like 2 so that it actually becomes brighter. Maybe set it to 1.5. And that could also help to maybe combat a little bit of the darkening that's happening from the clouds as well. And it's also something that you could do to the clouds, because as you make the atmosphere darker, it's actually making the entire planet a little bit darker. So remember, if we set this to 1, it's just mixing in this atmosphere amount. So you can bring the haze factor up and bring its strength, bring its intensity down. And then you can do this trick. We could even duplicate this here. Do the same thing with the clouds color. Or actually, we could even just bring up the brightness of the clouds color there, so that the atmosphere there is a little bit less noticeable. You know, it's there, but not quite as intense. So maybe we could actually do something like that. And then if we do bring it down the haze factor a little bit as well, we may not need it to be quite as bright. So that's a little tip for that, is you can actually bring down the brightness of the sky color, and that will kind of help to make it disappear a little bit more. So we've got this gas giant here that we've just created. Now the other thing that we can do to create even more depth is if I go ahead and add in another color, another color ramp. Maybe let's use that. Is we can use this actually to control the color of the clouds instead, just kind of like before. Instead of setting this to black, though, we'll set this also to a brighter color. In fact, we'll just paste in the same color. This allows us to get a little bit of variation. Right, so maybe we push this a little bit warmer. So instead of just being uniform and feeling kind of pasted on top, it's integrated a little bit more, and we're getting a little bit more of this interesting color variation. So save again, and it kind of ended up looking like we just made Jupiter, but again, and from scratch, kind of. So, maybe, you could mess around with some of the colors or whatever. I mean, overall, it doesn't look too much like Jupiter, I don't think. But the point is that we made a cool looking planet. And we can come in and we could join that as well and call this gas giants and bring up the label size way a lot. So there we have it. A cool technique to make some awesome looking planets, alien planet textures for use with the planet shader, which again is for free in Blender. All of this completely free. The textures, the shader, everything. Go check out the shader, go check out the textures, go mess around with it yourself. And once you are finished and make something cool, tag me at real.chrisfraser on Instagram, because I would love to see whatever you make. Or at realcfraser on Twitter. I absolutely love seeing people's creations with the stuff that I make. So to recap, we made this cool Terra planet by using a couple of different textures that we just mixed in interesting ways. We got a cool continent map sort of thing, some height going with a bump node, and we made this interesting reef thing going on with these more cyan looking parts in the ocean. we used some Venus clouds, some clouds from another planet, right? And used them as the clouds for this and just messed around with the sky color to make it whatever we wanted it to be. Then we made this awesome looking lava planet by, again, starting with a planet texture and changing the colors a little bit to make it what we wanted it to be. We did do a little bit of stuff with roughness, but not quite as much, because what we ended up doing a lot more was messing around with the emission. We took this planet map here, and then we made this awesome looking lava planet by taking this texture right here. It doesn't really matter what texture you end up using as long as it looks cool. Messed around with the color ramp, used a couple of different mixed RGB nodes with some blend modes, and made a really cool lava map that we were able to use for the planet. And then we made some smoke by just taking a couple of earth clouds, combining them with more mix RGB and lighten, messing around with the color ramp, using, again, a mix RGB node to tint it, and we ended up with some cool smoke clouds that we could throw on top. And then we finished it off by making a gas giant, sort of going back over some of the techniques that we used and just combining some different textures from different planets and using clouds in an interesting and innovative way to create something interesting. And we looked at an interesting technique for taking the sky color and making it something that's a little bit cooler. All for completely free, using a free open source tool, using free textures that you can download, and a pretty nifty free shader that you can get as well. So again, I will leave links to all of the free things that you can get to make this down in the description below if you are interested. I would highly encourage checking out all of these things, and I hope that you have enjoyed this video. If you have and you found this useful, make sure to like this video, subscribe, share it with somebody who might find it helpful, do whatever you need to do. If you make something cool using the stuff that I talked about, tag me in social media. Any social media you feel like tagging me in, on Reddit or Instagram or Twitter, although I probably won't respond if it's on Twitter or Reddit, but you might as well try. I absolutely love to see what people make with the stuff that I put out. And with that, I will see you the next time I have something cool to show you. Goodbye.